you've dropped hints on multiple times already in this conversation around fractional leadership. I want to dig in there a little bit. And you've got plenty of experience in this realm. I mean, you were you've done some fractional leadership. As I mentioned in the intro, you've been a fractional leader, and you've hired fractional leaders. You've got a lot of experience on this. So let's revisit that and maybe start with just summarizing or kind of tightening up when it makes sense to bring on a fractional leader versus going out there and spending big money on that ringer.
No, fair enough. And again, I think, if you want to use an analogy, I would use the gas tank. How much gas do you have in your tank? And that helps inform how fast you drive the car. Yeah. And whether or not you can get to your next destination. So, I think figuring out how you do more with less, I think really drives the concept of the fractional approach. Obviously, idealistically, if you can afford it and everyone's going to be engaged and happy, you can have everybody day one. But, you're going to be spending money that could otherwise be redeployed on drug development and what I would otherwise characterize as value creating activities. So you really have to, with that in mind, understand that and tie that to the company's evolution. The decision to bring on a fractional leader versus hiring full time depends on where the company is in its development. Preclinical, clinical, late clinical, or planning an IPO. I think those are important. As you evolve an organization, people, going back to the Wizard of Oz, people want to know if there's anybody else besides the man behind the curtain. So, you need a team, and this does allow you to kind of approach it from bringing in the expertise that's necessary to inform good decisions, to inform what you need to do in your clinical plan, in terms of filing your IND, et cetera, and et cetera. And I think, you got to look at this kind of build versus buy type of thing. And, I think there's tipping points for hiring as well. I think if the functional need begins to require more than 50% of someone's time, it's a good moment to reevaluate the role and understand that. By doing so, it ensures that the leaders are proactive rather than reactive. If you want somebody, I think, that has a view to what's in front as well as what's behind. And I think if you're trying to limit people to time, or if the organization's evolving, at the point that they're at 50% and you need more, you need to start thinking about whether you need someone in there to get ahead of things and being proactive rather than reactive. I think it's, and again, too many sad stories where I've seen pitfalls of folks being penny wise but pound foolish, and you need to understand what the long game is, but you also can't get in front of your skis too much. Hopefully, that's not another contradiction.
No, I get it. I just a quick follow up on that. You talk about 50%. Yeah, when a fractional employee gets to the point where 50% of their work is dedicated to your company, and maybe it's time to start looking at bringing that person on full time. If that's the person you want. Like, I'm curious about your perception on the fractional, quote unquote, like, market. I just had a conversation a couple of days ago with a guy who had a fractional chief technical officer, and the guy was working on contract for his biotech, and he wanted the guy on full time, but the guy was happy being a contractor. And only when that guy got to the point where, to your point, he was doing like 60% of his work on this one client, did he even entertain coming on full time. And fortunately for the biotech builder I was talking to, he wanted that guy. So we brought him on full time, and now he's there full time, and it's great. But is there, so this is the follow-up. I'll try to be more concise with my follow-up. Is there like a market of like, CXO for hire that, the biotech industry can take advantage of, knowing full well that those people are fractional and disposable? Or is it more a case where they have access to a CXO for hire that maybe they want to test drive, try on for size, and perhaps bring on full time down the road.
There is a market for this, and it's becoming increasingly popular. Certainly for CFOs, there's a number of organizations that do that, and it seems to be growing rather significantly, which I think really underscores the demand and the acceptance as a way of conducting business. Um, I'm not aware, but I believe there are organizations that can provide CMOs under the same type of situation. And then there's a lot of what I would say people who freelance in that regard, who don't necessarily need a broker, right? Why should I be sharing a part of what's being generated with a broker if you can generate it without the broker?
Yeah.
So I think there's a market for it, and I think also I think talking through colleagues. For instance, I connected to a situation from talking to somebody who was in a CEO leadership group, and at the CEO leadership group, someone expressed a need for a CFO, fractional CFO, and that one thing led to another. In another situation, I know people that I've worked with in the past, and they approach you and they say, we want you to join the team, but
Yeah.
we can't, this is where we are in our development, and so it's only on a fractional basis. But I think for the person that you referred to who really liked doing what they were doing, there's a lot to be said, and I think there's a lot of advantages on a couple of levels. I mean, on a company side perspective, right? You are getting a test drive. If you decide that you might want to try to hire this person in the future, you can see how they fit in, and and you minimize the costs of a bad hiring decision, for sure. On the flip side, from the service provider's perspective, it gives them optionality, right? Because even the best in drug development only have, a success rate of what, 10%, 20% maybe. Um, I think having a portfolio approach makes sense from a risk management perspective. What works good for investors can we work for the operator, and I'm certainly quite fond of collecting lottery tickets as I go about my business, and you only need one win to move the needle.
Yeah. Yeah. What other advantages does fractional leadership create for biotech companies? You mentioned a number of them. I just want to make sure I'm not leaving anything on the table here.
No, absolutely. Happy to. Fractional leadership allows an organization to leverage subject matter experts with extensive experience without depleting resources. This is particularly valuable where environments such as the one we're in now, where the cost of capital is extremely high.
Mm.
And it ensures that the organization benefits from expertise without committing to full-time costs. Um, and if you don't like it, you have the freedom to change to somebody else too. So you minimize the downside, but you are opening up the window to getting expertise that you might not otherwise have. And I think it does reduce your blind spots at the end of the day and allows you to make more informed decisions. And as a constant theme, time is the enemy. You don't get the time back. You make a bad decision. There's time and there's costs, and people look at runway, but they forget about overhead. Overhead's that silent killer. So, again, you do want to minimize your overhead, and fractional organizations do extend the cash runway.
I I'm assuming. I mean, I don't even know what they are. Like I'm not going to make any guesses, but there's got to be at least some risk levels around hiring contract employees, fractional employees. So what do biotech leaders who are considering it need to be cautious about? They say, okay, well, I think maybe for all these reasons that Alan Shaw has been expanding and expounding on this episode of the Business of Biotech, maybe it makes sense for us to do some fractional leadership hiring. What do I need to be careful about?
You're bringing somebody into your team, right? So, you should certainly exercise similar care. Um, while they're easier to adjust or replace than a full-time staff, I think it's still crucial to ensure cultural compatibility among other considerations. Referrals are a valuable source to finding qualified people. As I mentioned, many experienced professionals are adopting a portfolio to their careers in life sciences. And I think as a consequence, you know, there's a body of work that can be evaluated as well
Hmm.
as you talk to them. So, I think a little reference check is helpful. I think looking at their body of work, um, and I would be probably more focused on not necessarily the references that they may provide, but I think given that it's such a small sandbox that we live in, I think just identifying people who may have crossed paths with this person that's in your network is also a very valuable way of independently vetting a person, whether it's fractional, whether it's full time.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna drill down a little further on that question around risk, because it occurs to me, this is a highly sensitive industry that we work in. I've spent my entire career in the publishing industry, and I've worked as a full time employee. I've worked as a contract employee. I've been an independent contractor, and even in publishing, I've had to sign a lot of IP agreements, non compete agreements. In this biotech space, IP is so fiercely protected and so important. Um, what sort of precautions and protections should biotech employers be aware of or considering when they're saying like, "Hey, I might bring Alan Shaw in as a fractional CFO," not knowing necessarily whether Alan Shaw is also being a fractional CFO for my biggest competitor, someone else is playing in the same indication I'm in with a very similar molecule. Like, what do I need to do to protect myself?
In the situation that you specifically called out, that probably be the end of the discussion.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm not sure how you build a firewall or a Chinese wall high enough to insulate you against that. Um, but I think sometimes the best decision is the decision not to do something. But
Mm.
but I think as a general rule, I think the protections or the safeguards taken for fractional leadership are really similar to those for full-time hires. Their standard agreement should include confidentiality clauses. There should be indemnification, non-poaching of employees, and clear terms for company ownership of any inventions or intellectual property developing during the engagement. Um, so you want to kind of preempt issues of dispute and really clarify. It should be clarifying, and so that's very definitive. And these things are done for when you hire a full-time employees, and I think similar practices should be undertaken as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. All right, we're getting short on time here, so I'm going to wrap it up with another question or two, if that's cool with you. We've
Sure.
talked a little, yeah, we've talked a little bit about this, like try before you buy, and boy, I really like this person. I'd like them to be full time. But from a business perspective, just because I think Alan Shaw would be a great CFO full time, and he's been doing good work for me fractionally, it might not be a smart thing to do to go ahead and transition you into the CFO role from full time from a fractional role. So when does it make sense? Like, what's the writing on the wall that says, you know what, it's time to transition this guy into my full time position?
I would say the when is when the functional need begins to require more than 50% of someone's time. And that's a really good time to reassess the role, understand where you are with your development, understand where you are with your financing. Can you afford it? And I think it's also a good time to also just generally evaluate what other gaps do I have in my organization that need to be addressed. And just as an organization evolves, I'd also call out that sometimes you confronted with organizational obsolescence, where the organization has grown quicker than the people, and you want to get in front of that as well. It has implications on the culture, it has implications on execution. And as the company's growing, if you can recycle folks and put them in an area for success, as opposed to them being an impediment as the organization evolves, can be a win-win for everybody. In respect to the why is transitioning at this stage helps leaders to be proactive rather than reactive, avoiding the mistakes of trying to save money in the short term while potentially causing bigger problems in the long term. I think at the end of the day, you can either allow external factors to manage you, or you can do a better job of managing external factors to help derive the outcomes that you're working towards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What I feel like we've beat this horse pretty hard today. Like I think we've attacked this discussion from multiple angles and relentlessly. But I'm curious, what am I missing? What should I have asked you? Is there anything I should have asked you that's like an important part of this this hiring strategy, and particularly the fractional part is super fascinating to me. But is there a facet that we didn't beat on hard enough or at all?
I would say from a general perspective, I think we covered the concept and the approach to scaling an organization in a responsible, practical manner to achieve your goals without compromising on time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be important to emphasize that, these aren't races, but these are a marathon. And that, you need to kind of thoughtfully think about your development plan and think about how you go about filling the gaps. I think we go back to the beginning of this thing in terms of decision making. And I think at the end of the day, people make good decisions with good information. And the best way to mitigate the risks that the industry and the drug development pathway has, I think it serves everyone well to make sure that you have the right thought leadership available to execute.
Yeah, very good. Well, it's always a blast. It's always fun talking with you. It's always fun watching your face when I ask you the same question I just asked you in a different set of words, You're always a good sport to keep coming back on here and subjecting yourselves to these interviews. And I always have a fun time doing it. So thank you. Lots of insight there. We appreciate it.
Oh, always a pleasure to go back and forth with you, harmonize my conflicts and contradictions. And now I look forward to doing it all again.
Yeah, we need to do it again in person soon. It was J.P. Morgan the last time we did one of these face to face, and that was a good time. I enjoyed that. So we'll make that happen.
No, absolutely. Let's put our. I think there's more than one way to approach that, but
We'll take that offline.
You betcha.